Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is unwavering support in challenging times. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 3rd of June, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen ITV launching a review around its handling of Philip Schofield's affair with a younger colleague, Boris Johnson handing over his WhatsApp messages and notebooks as part of the COVID-19 inquiry, and the last ever episode of Succession revealing, don't worry, no spoilers here. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from The Week magazine is Leif Arbuthnot. From Money Week, it's Guy Anker. And from Daily Podcast Today in History with the Retrospectors, I've heard it's excellent, it's Arion McNicoll. Guy, you are up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Could you get prosecuted for watching illegal football streams online?
Ali, I didn't get to watch the game because there's that many different channels now, you know, that football's on. You got Viaplay, £15, BT Sport £30, Sky Sports £24, Amazon £9, you got Premier Sports. I can't keep up. I went to put it on, Ali, and I'm like, no, I'm not signing up for this channel.
Former footballer Gabby Agbonlahor on TalkSport on Wednesday. Guy, how many of those streaming platforms that he was just reeling off there do you have at home?
Most of them, to be honest with you, and I'm equally as bamboozled, I must say.
So what's the story?
So 5 men who illegally streamed Premier League football matches to tens of thousands of people have been jailed. What they were doing is they were selling cut price £10 a month subscriptions for these games, but the prosecutors basically found that they, quite frankly, they were pirating. They were taking genuine broadcasts, using the tech, which I don't really understand, to then get it onto their systems so people could watch it at knockdown prices. But it opens up all sorts of questions about the cost of football and why are people paying these amounts, because potentially, in some people's view, it is just too expensive to watch football through the legal channels.
Yeah, so when you say paying these amounts, what were their customers paying to receive their illegal streams of the football matches?
So what's been reported is £10 a month to watch games.
Okay. And you literally don't know the technology, how that worked. I mean, were users sticking a dodgy dongle in the back of their telly or what?
Yeah, it's essentially. When I say I don't know the technicalities. I don't know how they physically did it. You know, I don't understand how you get from one platform for another.
But we've all got a mate with one of those corrupted sticks, right? That's what you've seen.
No
correct?
comment on my friends. I don't have one though. I'll just declare.
I don't have one either, but I've seen one. When I went to stay in an Airbnb with a friend of mine, he brought along one of these sticks, and it was it looked like an Amazon Prime stick, but it actually was corrupted in some ways that he could access films from all over the world, as well as football. He was watching boxing when we were on holiday together. And Leif, these guys made over £7 million. It's obviously a pretty serious criminal operation. But for punters like that, for my mate, are these people, do you think, looking to break the law? Or is it just the case, he's a big Spurs fan, that ordinary people simply cannot afford to watch their team anymore?
I think it's somewhere, the truth falls somewhere in between the two. I think if you are streaming illegally, you probably do know, because it's quite difficult to, get it all rigged up onto your computer or your TV, that what you're doing is against the law. So I think some people will have justified watching these pirated games by saying, well, football's become so expensive, they're ripping off, everyone these days, and I can't even afford to go and see the physical matches, let alone pay for a subscription, to something like Sky or BT Sport. But I think there's something about the digital sphere, which means that, misbehaving, buying drugs off the internet or streaming a movie illegally doesn't really feel like real life crime. And the scale of this operation makes me think that probably, and also given the police are so stretched, probably a lot of the people who have been, watching these games won't ever see the inside of a court, let's say.
Well, this is it, isn't it, Arion? I mean, for the people who are obviously pirating and selling, it's a different scale of crime, as we were saying, but it still took the Premier League to do a private prosecution here, not the police.
Yes, that's right. And, to that question about who's going to end up in court over this particular crime and who isn't, well, people who are engaging in the practice of receiving illegal broadcasts, they probably will not, exactly for the reasons that we've kind of been talking about just now, that there's not the prosecutorial will, I think, to bring the cases, but also the crime is comparatively minor, and the people who they're really trying to target are these people at the tops of the operations who are going through all of these very complicated means, including by streaming from international broadcasters in, Qatar, the US, Australia, and so on, where these games are broadcast perfectly legally, and just bringing those streams to people in the UK. And so, those are the people who prosecutors and the Premier League are interested in bringing to justice. And I think that anyone who is in that category of choosing to bring streams into their own home probably don't need to worry. But what authorities say they should be concerned about are all of the sort of knock-on effects, because these people are criminals, and by giving them your details, you're opening yourself to other kinds of exploitation, including them, potentially rinsing your accounts or exposing you to malware and pornography and all of the other things that come with them.
Let's talk about that then, Guy. This business of, in other countries, these matches are available at much reduced cost than they are here. Is that fair? Someone could have a holiday home in, I don't know, the UAE, where they can watch everything, but when they're in Britain, they have to spend £100 to watch the same thing. Why is that? How have we got to this situation?
It's funny you say that. My in-laws used to live in the UAE, and I used to watch 3:00 games in the UK when I was there, which I can't watch here. Basically, the TV companies are not allowed to show matches between 2:45 p.m. and 5:15 p.m. on Saturdays. The fear is that people wouldn't go to matches in the lower leagues. They'd stay at home and they'd watch, Arsenal v Man United or whoever, and they wouldn't go to watch Rotherham or Barnsley or whoever else, which I suspect is probably outdated. Football is so popular, even when as you go further down the pyramid. So that's why there aren't as many games broadcast in the UK as there are in the UAE and across the world. I don't think it's fair. And you hear it from a lot of football fans. Why aren't the games live at 3:00 on Saturday? During COVID, every game was live. Now, slightly different because the games were so spread out and they weren't on top of all the sort of the League One, League Two games. So you didn't have that same issue. I do think it's an outdated principle. Football at the moment is so popular. It's very different in the 80s when we had the hooliganism problems. British clubs, or English clubs rather, were banned from Europe, and crowds were at minimal levels. Then we had the Hillsborough disaster. It was a horrendous time. It's a very different sport now. And I suspect, I'm talking about someone who I understand football. I think that they'd still get the crowds at the lower leagues, even if you had games live in the Premier League games live at 3 p.m. on a Saturday.
But also the market forces, Leaf, are global. That's one of the ways in which it's a very different sport, isn't it? If there is an audience all over the world, and we've seen this with movies, we've seen it with music, then it kind of needs to be available all over the world at roughly the same time.
Yeah, right. It's one of the kind of England's great sort of success stories is our amazing Premier League. But I agree that perhaps the model that we've got right now is outdated, and it just seems slightly, hard to believe that revenues would necessarily fall when there's clearly been such a kind of appetite for watching these games. And it seems that football has just I don't remember football being quite as big a deal even when I was a child. I live really close to the Chelsea football stadium, and I've always seen very happy crowds filling the streets. But just the degree to which it's become a kind of national culture, I think has changed.
It's a very diplomatic way of describing the crowds at Chelsea. Arion?
Yeah, I think that business of the blackout itself and whether it's fair or not, that 3 p.m. blackout, one group that it's definitely good for are the streamers, the illegal streamers themselves. The gang that was busted this week who offered a service called Flawless, they said explicitly that the blackout was good for business. It accounted for 80% of their subscribers. So I think there is an argument to be made that there there is just an appetite of people wanting to see the stuff that they can't see, rather than specifically going in search of illegal means to obtain something for less. People are paying ludicrous prices. You look at the cost of going to a Premier League match, at the very top end of the spectrum, if you go and see Tottenham or Arsenal, who I think are the number 1 and 2 respectively, a season ticket is on average about £2,000 for each of those teams. I think a bit less for Arsenal. So even going to a football match in the first place is expensive, and it's a thing that people have been shown to be willing to pay for. So I think that there's an argument that if you just loosened up the opportunity and made it possible for people to see these matches in a legitimate way, that people would find it and do it.
Well, isn't that kind of the analogy that happened with music and movies, Guy? I mean, you're roughly the same age as me. I'm sure you remember using Napster and stuff like that 20 years ago. And people did that because it was far too expensive to buy individual songs through iTunes. If you didn't have a decent broadband connection, that would take all night. So there was another solution that came up. But then once Spotify came along, those same people that were downloading things illegally were quite prepared to spend £7, £8, £9 a month so that they could listen to everything unlimited, because that was more convenient and legal. I just wonder if there's a more convenient legal answer to this question that everyone in the world would subscribe to for $10 a month, and the same revenue would be generated.
Yeah, I mean, it's so expensive to subscribe to everything. I mean, it depends what other packages you have, but you can be paying between £80 to £100 a month to subscribe to all the channels that would show Premier League football. So you've got that. You've got the fact that there is, around half the games aren't shown live on television. It's very difficult to show every game, of course, but having this blackout makes it harder to show even more. And I agree with you. It's a good analogy, that, because if you turn back the clock, buying an Elton John LP or cassette at that time was very expensive. You could do it for free, illegally. So you meet somewhere in the middle. And I should say as well, again, if you turn back the clock, I can't remember the exact time frame, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when it was just Sky doing Premier League football. At least you only had to pay one supplier. There weren't as many games as there are now, but very few people have the time or energy to watch every single game that's live. So they're probably not losing out by having fewer games back then. But it was cheaper then, because you only had to pay one supplier. Now, if you want to get the full suite, what is it? It's Amazon Prime, BT Sport, soon to be TNT, Sky, and then you can, as Gabby Agbonlahor said on the clip, other channels for other leagues around Europe. It is such an expensive business, so we do need to find a way to meet somewhere. I just want to challenge something Arion said. You put Tottenham as one of the top clubs. I completely disagree with you on that one. Arsenal, yes, by the way, not Tottenham.
I mean, despite all of that, Leaf, the fact is, it appears that the gatekeepers, the digital gatekeepers, are clamping down. They're not opening up. I mean, look at what's happening at Netflix with password sharing.
Yeah, exactly. So Netflix has introduced this very controversial new rule, which means that if you're kind of freeloading on an account by using, in my case, so my brother's password to watch Netflix now and then, now they're saying that, that if you're not in the same household, aka if you basically don't live at the same address, you have to pay more, either get your own subscription or the person whose account it is has to pay a bigger subscription fee. So it looks like, and that's gone down quite badly, not least because I think it was 2017, Netflix said love is sharing a password in a social media post. And so some of the other streaming giants have been slightly ribbing it for doing such a big U-turn on this principle. But it seems that there's been that, as there are more players in the sort of streaming market. At one time, Netflix was the king, but now obviously lots of other companies are in that space and doing very well. There's more competition. They're feeling more stressed about the financial aspect of the market, and so they're kind of trying to make savings, partly by doing this password clampdown. So it seems that it's a sort of stressier time to be in streaming than it was maybe 5 years ago.
Okay. Leaf, you're up next after this.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can Do is unwavering support in challenging times. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can Do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can Do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Okay, Leaf, your turn. And just a warning, we'll be discussing racist terminology in this next story. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Racism at the post office.
Several interviews with several investigators. They were all done alone. Aggressive, several hours. It was just awful. You've done this. This is going to happen to you. It's very difficult. It's really, really difficult. And I have tried to block it out.
Former Postmaster Sarah Burgess-Boyd speaking to Nick Wallace on his Radio 4 podcast, The Great Post Office Trial. You can hear the whole thing on BBC Sounds. Leaf, that series was back in 2020. The post office scandal goes back to the turn of the century. So what's happened this week?
Well, it's emerged that post office investigators were basically racially categorizing sub-postmasters that they were investigating using some pretty offensive and racist language. So these investigators put people into categories, including Negroid types, which was decided to be people of Caribbean origin and other people of colour, dark-skinned European types, and Chinese/Japanese types, amongst others.
And this news has only come out this week. How? Because, like I said, it goes back some time.
Yeah, it's thanks to the fairly tireless work of a campaigner who put in an FOI, Freedom of Information request, and has finally, it's produced this quite depressing revelation that basically the post office was using racist terminology to categorise its own people.
Yeah, Eleanor Shake, that campaigner. Leaf, I know some people listening won't be on top of what happened in the post office scandal and why we're talking about it at all, so let's just return to that in a second. But first, Arion, on this matter of capturing ethnic data, obviously the term Negroid is highly offensive. I don't think there's any debate about that. But the idea of capturing it at all, that's part of corporate life now, isn't it? I'm forever ticking boxes saying what my ethnic data is. Is that objectionable in and of itself?
Well, the history of using these so-called racial identification codes goes back to the 1970s, where they were used by police across the UK, and evidently at some point they were brought across to the post office security setup. I think what's surprising is how long some of this terminology stuck around, because by the mid-noughties, the Metropolitan Police had completely abandoned using words like Negroid and so on. So I think the big question is that why in 2008 and even onwards was the post office still describing people in this way? And look, the post office has actually apologized. Nick Reed, who's its chief executive, apologized for the language that was used by its security teams in compliance documents.
Yes, but again, that's the terminology, isn't it? What about the collection of the data at all, per se? Was that wrong? Because some people commenting on this story have been like, why would they need to know what colour everyone was? Did they need to know?
I think that's a really interesting question. And so far, they have failed to answer the questions coming from particularly BBC journalist Nick Wallace, who's done a lot of work around all of this. And what he's basically trying to clarify is exactly that question. Why was this essential to be gathered about these people in the first place? And so far, the post office has failed to reply to him on that.
Okay, so Leaf, just bring us up to speed then in as much of a nutshell as you can about what the post office scandal is, what happened, what we knew until this week where this bombshell came about.
Okay, so sub-postmasters basically run post offices, and until 1999 they were mostly using paper ledgers, but then this software was introduced to do all the sort of accounting, do stock takes and keep track of the money that was going in and out. But the trouble was that this software had faults in it that basically made it look like money was disappearing from the branches. And as this happened, some of the sub-postmasters started feeding in their own money to basically make up for the losses because they didn't know what was going on. But some of them couldn't or didn't. and they ended up being prosecuted. So some more than 700 of these sub-postmasters were completely wrongfully accused of stealing money, and some of them went to prison. Some of them died by suicide. It's ruined hundreds of lives.
To what extent do you believe the post office when they issue the statements that Arion was mentioning earlier, though, that they've moved on, that they're a different company now? Because, they're sort of crucial to British life still, aren't they? A lot of people use the post office even if they don't think they are using the post office. I've got a travel insurance policy with them, for example.
Yeah, I mean, look, you get in any organisation, it's like, you've got this conversation with the police, don't we, at the moment? Is the Met Police institutionally racist? Obviously, you've got good eggs, you've got bad eggs in any organisation, but you need the leadership at the top to make sure that the right values go down the chain. So to answer your question, I don't know whether, the post office has sorted itself out. I suspect this has been such a high-profile scandal over the last few years. If they hadn't, they probably are putting the processes in place to do that now, because obviously it's new people now there. We're not talking about the same people that were perpetrating these awful policies. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And I suspect the new people are probably trying to improve things if they're not something seriously wrong.
It's become a big story now, Arion, but it wasn't a big story for many years. It was really just being reported by Nick Wallace, who's a freelancer, and then covered by outlets like Private Eye. It's only really in the past few years that it seems to have sort of come to mainstream consciousness that, yes, all these people were wrong.
It's astonishing, isn't it? This group, Justice for Sub-Postmaster Alliance, began their first group litigation only in 2017, and that was this litigation action that was brought by 550 former employees. But it wasn't until December 2019 that the Post Office agreed to do any settling at all. And so I think, even the time that it took for these cases to get before the courts, let alone for it to come to the individual attention of, first of all, journalists and then the wider public, has been quite astonishing when you consider how far back a lot of this stuff happened. Just a thing on, who hasn't been brought to any kind of justice. Most prominent among them is the ex-chief executive Paula Venables, who during her time working for the Post Office earned £4.9 million and a CBE. She was there between 2012 and 2019, but also Tim Parker, who's the current chairman, and he backed her policy of these really aggressive prosecutions, and neither of them have had to face any sort of legal ramifications. Plus, as well, Fujitsu, the supplier of the software that underpinned these systems that caused so much problems and literally the loss of lives and livelihoods, is continuing to get contracts with the UK government. They're deeply entrenched in the government's IT infrastructure, and they continue to win bids to supply future IT software as well. So I think that there's a lot of different ways in which the people that you might expect to end up having something to answer for have not so far.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Fujitsu would say, yes, our software unfortunately had an anomaly and was creating mistakes, but it was the Post Office who decided to prosecute people knowing it was generating mistakes. But Leaf, on that point, AI, I guess you'd call it now, wouldn't you? I don't suspect anyone was using that term about Post Office software in 1999. But nowadays, computer systems underpinning corporations are increasingly being trusted to do things like talk to customers directly. Could this be a dangerous bellwether for what happens next?
I think it is. I think it's the story is also about what happens when humans put their trust too much in machines or in complicated systems that they don't understand. On the small scale, in individual post offices, it was people being like, "I don't know what's going on here. I must be at fault." But on a bigger scale, it was the post office saying, "Well, surely it's dishonest people. It's these dishonest postmasters rather than something to do with the IT system." And I think it does augur sort of some of the problems that will come when we integrate AI more fully into maybe the way the government works. We saw this week in a case that we were writing about in The Week, an interesting story from the US about a lawyer who used ChatGPT to come up with some cases, some examples of cases to sort of support the case that he was building for a client. And it turned out that all 6 cases that ChatGPT provided to him were completely materialized out of nothing. They were fake, they were bogus. And he said, "Oh, I didn't know that ChatGPT could even produce false content." And so there is a kind of, I think humans are in love with the machines that we make, but sometimes we are naive and we think that they are better than us and that they're not prone to error. But actually, they really are, as the post office scandal has shown.
Also, AI systems have already shown themselves to engage in various sort of discriminatory language and behavior, extending higher credit to men than to women when they're given those sorts of responsibilities, and favoring white patients over black patients in hospital settings when making medical appointments. There are these real big thorny questions where we're going to have to work out what the answer is going to be about who is liable for those particular wrongs if we are to unleash these systems in broad and different contexts. And I think this is a really good microcosm of that massive potential problem to come.
Okay, Arion, you're up next after this. Okay, Arion, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week we learned that compared with other animals, Homo sapiens might not be all that sapiens after all.
A lot of people say an octopus is like an alien. But the strange thing is, as you get closer to them, you realize that we're very similar in a lot of ways. It's a hard thing to explain, but sometimes you just get a feeling and you know there's something to this creature that's very unusual. There's something to learn here.
South African diver Craig Foster in the Netflix trailer for the film that made me swear I'd never eat calamari again, My Octopus Teacher. Arion, what's the story this week?
Yeah, so My Octopus Teacher was released by Netflix in 2020, and it's a film that's all about the human interest in animal intelligence, specifically, unsurprisingly, octopus intelligence. And it was mentioned this week in a fascinating long read by Adam Kirsch that was published in The Guardian, which looked at the current flood of new research that's really overturning our long-standing assumptions about what animal minds are and are not capable of. And the piece draws together a range of recent experiments, including one about giraffes' statistical reasoning, zebra finches having dreams, and a bunch of others that show that animals have skills that just we really didn't realize they were capable of previously, including unexpected things like planning for the future and even having a sense of fairness.
Okay. So what? I mean, it's really interesting to read that giraffes can choose, carrots over courgettes, but how does that affect my life?
In so many potential ways, and I think, the way that Kirsch's article unfolds, he wants to talk about a few things. One, our current quest for a sort of sense of our own intellect in the grand scheme of everything that is either both above and below us. Previously we've often had this sense of divine minds as being the only minds that were superior to us. Now we kind of look to things like AI, which we were just discussing, and or its potential in the future, and extraterrestrial intelligence. So I think thinking about ourselves and what we are capable of, that's often a great sort of infatuation of humans, thinking about ourselves, but also thinking about what rights, what opportunities, and what things we can learn from animals themselves. What do we want to extend to them in a form of new respect based on this new understanding that we're gaining about them?
Well, Guy, do you think, we learn that elephants have a superior sense of smell, so therefore we release them from the zoos? I mean, people know that keeping animals in captivity is basically wrong, don't they? I don't know if knowing about their intelligence changes that, or does it?
Funny you should ask that. I went vegetarian about 3.5 years ago, and one of the many reasons was when my wife told me that pigs are as intelligent as dogs. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. That's what she read. And then, I started looking into it. We've got a dog ourselves, and I think they've got as much right to live as we do. And this is such an interesting story for me, because I said to Arion before we came on air, it's one of the most interesting I think we've done on this when I've been on it, because I do think understanding animals' intelligence, emotional and what we, actual intelligence, is important for how we treat them. And you just look at it. When you see you're in an airport and you see dogs sniffing, they're sniffing for drugs. Dogs can apparently smell cancer in the opinion of some people. They have abilities that we don't have. We think our ability to, create a computer, record a podcast, work out the theory of relativity is what's key.
It's very flattering of you to include record a podcast in that list.
Einstein and Olly Mann, very similar. But that's through the eyes of a human. And those documentaries, with I haven't actually seen the octopus documentary, or My Friend the Octopus, and apparently it's very it's emotional. I'm told. I think they're important for us to watch. And I speak as somebody who never had animals until I met my wife, and then she had a dog who therefore I inherited.
It's a stepdog.
It's really interesting. Just I didn't understand the emotions and the intelligence that a pet can have. So I think it's such an interesting topic for us to understand how intelligent they are, how intelligent they can be, and therefore how we treat them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about my octopus teacher, Leaf, was that the diver who made the film was going to a place where the animals that lived there, those sea creatures, had never seen people before. So it wasn't the same as interacting even with wild animals in a zoo. These were animals who were as curious about him as he was about them. And one of the takeaways for people, I suppose, is, there's life on this earth that lives its own superior existence, thinking that it runs the sea. And just as we do, appears to be at the top of the food chain, has no awareness of us.
I'm going to provide a bit of salt in the in the oyster. So I was raised partly on a farm, and I find it quite difficult, despite this interesting read that Arion suggested, to kick the hunch that human beings are part of the animal kingdom, and that our desire to eat other animals is a fairly ingrained and natural part of what it is to be a human. I did actually find myself in the aisle at the sort of meat aisle at Tesco the other day, and thinking maybe I won't make a ham hock soup because I'd seen a sweet pig and I was like, I'd feel a bit bad about it. But broadly, I think that I'm often left quite confused, actually, when people talk about there's a kind of misty philosophy that I don't understand, or misty ethics behind people's vegetarianism or veganism. It's not. It's sometimes I want to know what it links to. Is it that human beings are exactly on the same kind of ledger? We should have the same rights as animals, because that would have extraordinarily bad consequences for human life as we know it. Medicines, for instance, a big one. All sorts of research that has helped human beings flourish. Or is it a hang up from sort of Christian ideology? I'm often a bit like, it seems that pro-animal ideology floats on a kind of mysterious basis that I don't understand, and that I wish people would talk about more.
Well, maybe, Arion, and this is what I got out of the Guardian piece, it's more just these questions weren't really being discussed in mainstream science until the last few decades. Like, you were seen as a bit of a quack if you even talked about animal sentience. It wasn't seen as relevant. So perhaps that's why Leaf feels she doesn't have the contextual vocabulary to discuss it.
Yes, and I think even shy of assessing whether this new information is going to change our feelings about whether it's right or wrong to kill and eat animals, and more broadly our behavior towards them. I think it's the questions that are being asked are greater than that. They're like, well, what can we learn from creatures that are so fundamentally different to us that for so long we've just been really demeaning? We've been regarding them as being inferior to us in what their brains can do, and consequently not trying to learn anything from them. And, if you take the octopus as an example, in this piece, Kirsch mentions the fact that they have 500 million neurons, which is admittedly much less than humans have. But what's interesting about them is that their neurons are distributed throughout their arms each of which can move and smell and perhaps even remember on their own. That's just such a radical alternative way of understanding how the mind could work, that even considering that is a sort of foundational point from which you think we might be able to build in our understanding of, them, us, the universe, all of those things. So I think that there are broader questions to engage with, as well as the question about whether it's right or wrong to eat things with eyes and noses. That too is legitimate. But I think there are big things that could potentially come from us getting to know animal sentience in a different way.
Why is brain power so relevant, though, Guy? I mean, you mentioned, a pig is as intelligent as a dog, so it made you think differently about it. But, when it comes to people, if someone's of low intelligence, they're often perceived as vulnerable and they need extra looking after. And yet with animals, the main thing people seem to say is, I don't want to kill something that's as clever as me, but I'm happy to whack a fish over the head. What is that?
It's a good question. I don't have the full answer, but in terms of brain power, the human example you gave, vulnerability can be many things. If we assume everyone has the same luck, those with the greater brain power will probably go further in our world, in the human world. But I don't think it's just about brain power. I think let's separate intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence and actually say they're both as important as each other. So it's not about, can an octopus do the times table? Of course they can't. But they are, it seems to be that they are capable of having emotions that we didn't think they could have. And I also think, again, this is just my speculation here, being around animals, I get a sense they sense things that we can't sense. Tension in the room, emotion. They're sometimes better at, I think, than humans are at working out somebody else's emotion. Now, that's just my opinion, my experiences, and that might be completely disproven by a scientist. But the point...
Some people, Guy, would say you shouldn't have a pet at all if you feel these things. If you're thinking about animal sentience, you shouldn't be keeping an animal under your lock.
And that is a very good point. The counter to that is dogs, for example, are bred in that way, and that's a dog that's all they've known. But I'm not challenging what you're saying, more just giving the opposite view. Why this is such an interesting debate is I just hope this is one tiny piece in the jigsaw that just helps us understand animals, and whether it's our choices whether to eat them. I'm not saying people should go vegetarian. That's my choice, not forcing that on others. But how we treat them in terms of what we eat, do we keep them in zoos? How we just treat them in general. Like you had that ridiculous footballer, who was it, Kurt Zuma, that was kicking his cat because he saw the cat as this thing, which was just horrible. It's things like that we definitely need to change.
It's interesting, Arion, that we've sort of ended up talking about vegetarianism, but actually that's not what this article was about, was it? This was just saying, did you know that animals can be sentient in all these different ways and how intelligent they are? What did you take from it? What did you think was the kind of big lesson?
Well, I think there were a few, and I think that, the reason we've skewed off in one particular direction was because it was asking such broad and questing questions that are related to the subject broadly. But I think that certainly our treatment of animals is a thing that we could ask ourselves from what it was discussing. But one of the other things that I think Kirsch was trying to address was this sort of sense of existential loneliness that humans have tended to have, feeling as though we are the only thoughtful creatures in the entire known universe, and how sad we are because of that, and how interested we are in making contact with other intelligent life out there, neglecting the very life that is on our doorstep. The world, as it turns out, according to the latest research that we've been doing, is filled with the sorts of intelligence that we might be seeking, while blithely ignoring the great myriad of fascinating stuff that we could learn from dogs and octopuses and finches and so on. And I think that sense of a kind of reciprocal relationship, that we're not just setting out to learn about what animals are capable of so as to be able to teach them random tricks and make them, behave more like humans, but learn about their experience of the world and what we could gain as a species and as individuals from understanding that better. That seems like stuff that's meaty and worth, if you'll forgive it, and worth grappling with.
Leaf, did you make the ham hock soup?
I actually didn't in the end, partly because I thought it was too wintry.
Right. Very well. Well, our search for intelligent life continues on the next edition. In the meantime, my thanks to Leaf, Arion and Guy. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.